Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of News in 15. I am Daniel Smith, and with me is
Susan Swayze,
Susan Swayze.
Queen for the Day.
She's the queen for the day, right after Father's Day. That's nice. So we'll start with Susan, and we have some topics that we want to address. First, we'll talk about Juneteenth and the implications for this holiday. The good. There's some people who saying, we don't need a holiday. So Susan and I will kind of jump into this, and then we would look at Father's Day and how men celebrate it and the implication for Black men. There have been some stories out there. And then we'll look at there was the state of the Black family economic report that came out. So we'll jump a bit into that. But we'll start with Juneteenth. So, Susan, what are your thoughts on Juneteenth? I realized that you had a nice post about it. You were very reflective of the moment of what it means, the holiday. So, what are your thoughts of Juneteenth?
Yeah, so I grew up in California, but my mom is a proud Texan. And so we celebrated Juneteenth when people didn't know what it was because as a Texan, they celebrated it because for them, they knew about the significance of finding out finally that the slaves were free 2.5 years after it was the Emancipation Proclamation. So, the main thing that comes to mind for me is signing something into law isn't enough to change behavior. So, it actually has to be communicated to individuals and followed up on. In the case of Juneteenth, they actually rode into Texas and ensured that not only did slaves know that the enslaved people know that they were free, but that the enslavers had to let them go. So that happened under the force of law and gun, really. And then they had to have a third legal move to actually get slavery abolished. So it's like a three-part act, three-part play, three-act play. So first of all, they said slaves are free. Then they had to actually go to states where people were still being enslaved and literally stand there to make sure that it occurred. And then they followed up with abolishing slavery. But we still can't get an anti-lynching law passed. So you just have to wonder why it takes, three acts for behaviors to change. Well, we've got to keep going back, to the ballot box and to the Senate floor and everywhere else to make the necessary change occur. Why would anybody vote against fixing something on paper that shouldn't be? It's still unclear to me.
Well, I guess there's a lot more work to be done. But in terms of what I was uh, curious and what really was enlightening to me was that the vote for Juneteenth to be passed was unanimously passed in the Senate. So that was one of the things that I was interested in, and what some of the thought provoking things that I've seen largely on LinkedIn and on some of the social media platforms is that there are people who are saying, we don't need a holiday for Juneteenth. We need reparations, or we need, equality of certain things. Um, and my viewpoint is that while I understand, the that this is largely symbolic to some, I do believe that there's importance of the symbolism of what it represents to people who have been enslaved. And while it does not, it doesn't cover all of the pancreas problems that we have, it does at least acknowledge. And I do believe that acknowledgement is important in terms of starting or continuing the conversation that a lot of us have been very vocal about over the last year in terms of this whole conversation of equality. So we can't be asking for equality about certain things, but here is a holiday being presented, and for some people, it's just a facade. But at least on the face of it, it's an administration taking the necessary steps to basically wrong the rights of things that have, you know, existed time immemorial for some of us. I can, that's the way I see it. I don't believe that it's uh, it's just window dressing. I do believe that yes, there's other things to be done, but at least celebrate the moment or the victory that you've gained, and then you continue working for the other things. I don't know.
Well, did you happen to catch DL Hughley's? Um,
His take.
DL Hughley had a spot on Don Lemon show when he talked about asking for a certain gift and being given something else, but he
Hmm.
still wants the gift that he asked for.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like asking to go to a fine restaurant with the white tablecloths and the candles on the table, and to get the five, the 5 course meal, and they give you a happy meal. They give you a snack. Well, a snack, but really ask for that fine dining 5 course experience. And so I want voting rights protected.
Of course.
I mean, there are things that will matter on a grander scale, but I do appreciate that after 150 years of celebrating Juneteenth, that it's now a federal holiday, that
Yep.
I want voting rights protected for everyone.
Of course, and one does not diminish the other or make up for. So I do believe, like I say, you have to keep pushing for the other things that you need and that is imperative for creating a more equitable system. No gainsaying that. I'm just like amazed at some of the comments and the reactions of people. It's like, yeah, you have, it's not necessarily the end of the world. You've got to keep it moving. That's my own opinion. It's just that, there are other things that we have to fight for and that we'll continue to fight for. It doesn't mean that, you're not going to be uh, vocal in terms of what else is required as a society or to make equity exist. So, um,
How about the George Floyd bill? Let's get that passed.
yeah.
Hey, Lynching law. Let's get that passed. So those that's my 5 course meal in a fine restaurant. I want voting rights protected. I want the George Floyd bill passed, and I want the anti-lynching law passed. And more things after that. But those three, that would make me feel that the government is truly responsive.
Well said. But coming even out of this week, last week, with the Juneteenth bill being passed, the story of Opal Lee came to the fore, and which is why I say the work isn't finished. And what I think that the inspiration that we can draw from Opal Lee is that number one, she's 91 years old now. She's called the grandmother of Juneteenth. And 5 years ago, she was basically walking for this holiday. So, I mean, what I gained from that is that we can, a lot of us are, sometimes they call us keyboard warriors, and we sit behind a desk and we type our opinions into Facebook and LinkedIn and whatever social media platform. But here's this, she would have been 85 or something at the time. She was basically walking for this holiday for Juneteenth. So if a lot of us want, the 5 course meal, we have to put in the work for the 5 course meal, as you've alluded to. And the question is, how are we mobilizing ourselves to really get these other things on the table? But I'm looking at a 91-year-old sitting down next to the president, and I'm like, whoa, this is somebody who's just not just talking the talk, but she's walking the talk. And 5 years ago, she started the walk for the Juneteenth holiday. So that was one of those lessons coming out of it that I was totally. I mean, we can draw inspiration from anywhere. So she was my winner of the week kind of last week in terms of whoa, she is really going after what she wants.
Right. And remember too that she'd been celebrating Juneteenth observances and coordinating things for the past 40 years. It
Right.
was the last 5 years that she did that 2.5 mile walk for to get greater attention for the advocacy that she'd been doing for 40 years. So it's a lesson in patience, but also maybe also in pivoting.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think that, it's just about us taking the lessons and learning the lessons, but also being very intentional about what we want. I do think that, that the wins that we can get from that are just tremendous. So for me, that's my winner of the week right there last week. That at 91, I'm not sure that most 91-year-olds would be thinking about, hey, how can I go walk and create a holiday or anything like that. I'm like, yeah, I've lived my life. It's time to go take a snooze or something. I don't.
I'll check in with you in what? 5 years?
Oh boy! So after Juneteenth, we celebrated Father's Day.
Mm.
So I posted on LinkedIn this article, showing that there's this misrepresented narrative about Black fathers not being involved in their children's lives, and there was a study that was done that showing that Black fathers are some of the most involved parents uh, in their children's lives. Um, you know, doing everything from washing, cleaning, cooking, just helping around the house, and um, being good fathers. And it was, for me, it was curious in terms of how much attention was generated about this article. As a Black father, and I guess birds of a feather flock together. So usually my circle of friends sometimes and the people I interact with, to me, all are fathers who are taking care of their children. So I was just kind of blown away in terms of the reaction. But I do believe that Black fathers have been, given a raw deal in terms of the way that we have been represented and portrayed by the media a lot of times.
Yeah, but I also would like to say, while we're on that, we talk about the media. I mean, I want to talk about, Black movie makers. Like I'd love to see more movies that have, the narrative of the Black man that's doing it all. I can't think of how many comedies I've seen where, you know, some of the stereotypes that we're trying to dispel are actually the core of the movie. I won't point anybody out, but he could come out, or she, and balance it with movies that portray a different narrative. But I think about TV shows. Everyone point to the Cosby Show when that kind of gotten tarnished, but that was a family that you saw. Dr. Huxtable was very involved with the family, and Claire Huxtable was a rock star. But so many other shows that we see, it's like a Black woman and some kids. You don't always get to see a dad figure at work in the family, and I'm not sure why that is. But when also think about some of the movies I see that are predominantly white movies, like on Lifetime, it's always a woman who's being portrayed and run down by her ex-boyfriend or her husband, and they're all white. So I don't know. People talk about that. So there's stereotypes that are portrayed, I guess, on both sides. But when we're making stereotypes movies, I think that people might take them to be fact, whether they're viewing them here or viewing them globally. But when you're perpetuating stereotypes, I don't know. I don't know. People always get the jokes. They might think it's real.
Yeah. And as you put that out there, I know Kevin Hart this weekend on Netflix and Father's Day, there was a movie that came out with him about fatherhood as a Black father minding a child. I'm yet to watch it, but I just saw snippets of it. But I do believe you know as with everything, there's the the high frequency numbers in terms of where it is at, in terms of who is actually doing it. But again, it's just about doing the work, and I do believe that
I have a great example.
What is that?
The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith.
Oh, that was one of those. That was
There
one.
you go. That's a great example of one that breaks stereotypes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and he was breaking stereotypes all how. As a father, he was a single father. As a broker, he was a black man. He became onto, and then and the real life story of I forget Gardner is his name. The real life story is also very interesting in terms of how he did it. So ultimately, I do believe and we have those stories out there. The question is how interested are people in actually pursuing these stories and making them into things that we can see that are representation. And as we are on that topic, it led me back to a post where I was talking about just what we see. I came across something recently about a doctor who is basically she's making dolls now of black girls, and there was one story that touched me particularly. I think it was Wednesday or Tuesday, about this girl who went into the ER and she saw a doctor, and she was so amazed to see a doctor who looked like her. She ran and she hugged the doctor, and she was a black doctor, and I was just like, wow. And there are people who try to downplay this stereotype to make it feel like you don't know what you're talking about. And that one story to me kind of hit home, because it says she said she had seen all other races of doctor, but that was the first black doctor she had ever seen in her life. I think she was like 8 years old, and she said she wanted to become a doctor after that. So there's so much in terms of virtualization, in terms of just the power of seeing. I know from my own life, Dr. McStuffins was something that my daughter kind of grew up on, because I saw her as being one of those. She was a toy doctor, but she was one of those breaking the stereotypes. And I do believe that we need much more of those, to if we're ever going to create the equality in the world that we want in the future.
Yeah. And I will say too, as a professor, I get so many students, and again, these are adults who run companies, between the ages of 35 and 60. Some of them saying to me, I'm the first black professor they've ever had. I'm like, wow, you've gone through all this schooling, you've gone through undergrad and an MBA, and I'm the first black professor you've ever had in a doctoral program. Like it just remind me that representation matters.
Go, Dr. Swayze. So to some people, Dr. Swayze is a hero.
I teach statistics.
Hey,
Hero.
hey, you are a hero to many people, man. That's wonderful. I mean, you may not see it as such. I got an email from somebody saying recently, I look up to you, and I'm like, me, little old me. But I mean, we don't always know the impact that we have on others' lives. But again, once you're doing and walking in that role, there are people who are gonna look at you as an inspiration type. And I think that that's kind of one of the reasons that I do this with you, because I do think that there's so many people that we can impact, and so many people whose lives that who may just watch us once and say, hey, that's a doctor who is in statistics, and I want to be a statistics professor too. We never know the impact that we can have on people's lives, but I think that just being there and creating awareness gives so much life, and gives people so much momentum. So congrats, Dr. Swayze, you're a hero today. So
On to
Dr.
the
Swayze,
story.
Dr. Swayze, our hero for the day. You posted the article on the Black household, the economic state of Black America. Uh, you read through it, and you have some statistics that you want to go. You give us the statistics on that, because I mean, we've gone through it and we know it. So I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked. I don't know. You see it and you're like, here we go again. The numbers don't lie. So
Yeah.
so what did you see coming out of the numbers?
What, the only 2% of black households have a net worth over 1 million? That sobering fact. Only 2%. Only 2%. That's just heartbreaking.
2% of a population where we're 13%. So in 13, that means 11% of the population is under 900 or under $1 million.
98%.
Yeah, that's 98%. But remember what I'm the 2%, the 11% I'm looking at is that means that remember the African American population is 13% of the entire pie of the US population.
Oh, okay.
So when we start taking those numbers away, that's 11%. And so 98% of that is under 1 million. And then when we start digging further down into that, you were saying that there's 10,000 who have a negative net worth.
3.5 million families have a negative net worth.
Yeah.
So they owe more than they have. 3.5 million families. Black families.
And what I wanted to get out of that was, how much do we even break down? Because now we start needing to look at what does that represent under the poverty line? Because if you're already negative worth, then are you considered below the poverty line? How does that break down?
I thought the poverty line was based on how much you made each year. Like you can make money each year, but owe more than you make.
Yep.
Right. So, yeah. And then there's also 7.8 million Black families that have a net worth of less than 10,000.
So when we put it all together, where do we go? I mean, 7.8. Then you have how many? How much is below 10,000?
7.8 million Black families have a net worth of less than 10,000. 3.5 million Black families have a negative net worth. I believe that's what it said.
Right. So that's approximately 10.5 million when you put those numbers together. 7.5 and 3.5, 10 something.
11. But here's the thing. So usually your house, the investment you have in your house beyond what you owe is what contributes most to someone's net worth.
Yeah.
So, we got to keep pushing on the home ownership and, building up the equity and not always doing the cash out refi, because that is what literally contributes most to people's net worth numbers. The average person, not the people who have family generation of stocks and, been handed down Apple stocks and Delta stocks, et cetera. That's a different echelon of people. But those of us who are working daily, usually our net worth comes from our home.
But I would also say that those are things that we really need to get onto in terms of investing. I would also say building companies is part of because when you look at the amount of first generational wealth by most of your billionaire class, especially in technology, our first generation, there wasn't too much handed to them. While they may have been in the middle socioeconomic class, what you do realize is that they have built their wealth from scratch. Most billionaires, especially in things like technology. So I do believe that there is some pathway to. But then, when I flip that conversation, you ask how much Black founders can actually get investment from a VC company, etc. While those numbers are going up, because you realize that only 2% of VC funding goes to Black founders, you do realize that while technology may be the great equalizer, and for me, I said this to somebody recently, I said, my love affair with technology was by watching people like Yahoo founders and stuff like that. Those guys who, Google founders, Yahoo founders, all of those guys who essentially were first generation, they were immigrants, they didn't necessarily have anything. But you do realize is that when you start looking at VC and funding and the numbers, you do realize that it really doesn't necessarily trickle down. So the conversation of trickle down economics doesn't work as much as we'd like to believe that it does. So I do believe that there's a lot of work to do in terms of how we educate people around things like stock ownership, etc. I do believe that that's and also an avenue in terms of wealth generation. But I know there's black startups who are addressing the conversations of mortgages and getting into home ownership. So eventually those numbers should go up. But when you really look at it, we have a whole lot of work to do in several different areas to be able to make sure that this conversation is more equitable, because those numbers, that's 10 million people who basically 10 to 11 million people who are basically worth less than $10,000, either negative net worth or just between $0 and $10,000. 10 million people. So it's that's distressing when we just look at it even on the surface. So yeah, I'm trying to do my part, and I do believe that what we're doing in terms of educating people, really would help to, point people to the ways that they can increase their net worth.
I think you do on a weekly basis.
Well, that's just my small part in terms of the conversation, but I do believe that we just have to help point the way to what is out there, because uh, while you and I both have a master's degree in business, you are a doctor. I do believe that we may have a bit more opportunities and information available to us, also because of the uh, network in which you associate with. It provides you with those kinds of opportunities, and so we just need to figure out how to continuously not only just put the information out there, but seek new avenues. And this is kind of why we do what we do. Is about seeking new avenues to create that conversation and get people, just opening people's eyes about what is out there and what their opportunities are.
Yeah. And getting people in college and straight out of college, because the rule of 72 and compounding and all those things, the sooner you start, the better off you are.
Yep. Yeah. So, Dr. Swees, our hero of the day, this was an enlightening conversation. And, I just think that, we continue to do it on a weekly basis. We continue to put the information out there, and we continue to engage people, because all these things would help us to really to move those numbers in a more progressive direction. The 7 million who are negative net need to get out of, I don't even know how soon, or, if there are numbers around moving those numbers forward during the decade. But, you know, it's going to take a village to really try to get those numbers to more sensible numbers, and getting more people to have an increased net worth at the end of the day. So thank you for, co-hosting News in 15, and folks, thanks for joining us on another episode of News in 15. You can catch us on our LinkedIn page where we post, or you can like my page, or you can like Dr. Sway's. And next week we'll talk about a bit of Dr. Sway's diversity effort. She is, very vocal, and in terms of diversity, in terms of some of her efforts. So we'll dig a bit into that, and just understand how she may be able to help, right size those conversations. But Dr. Swiss, thank you again, and continue to do the great work that you're doing. And we're going to continue parenting during the summer, because that's what we do. All right, thanks, folks. Bye.